February 13th, 2017 began as an unseasonably warm winter day in the small town of Delphi, Indiana. The local middle school was off for a snow day, even though the sun shone brightly and temperatures climbed above the norm. For 14-year-old Libby German and 13-year-old Abigail Abby Williams, best friends who were inseparable since meeting in 6th grade, it was the perfect chance for an afternoon adventure. The two girls had spent the previous day together, a Sunday night sleepover which was really rare, and it was filled with giggles, crafts, and they even practiced their softball swings in Libby's backyard, getting so excited for the upcoming season. Libby had convinced Abby to join the softball team with her that spring. That Monday, the girls set out after lunch to enjoy another shared hobby, photography, and their chosen destination was one of their favorite local hiking spots, the Monon High Bridge Trail, Delphi's tallest scenic attraction, an old railroad trestle spanning Deer Creek. With Libby's older sister Kelsey dropping them off just after 1:30 p.m., the teens headed down the wooded trail, Libby's phone in hand to capture all of the moments and hold on to the memories. But sadly, this was a day that people would end up not wanting to remember. It was the day that these two lovely young girls went missing, and fear and mystery spread through the town of Delphi. So today, we are going to dive deep into the Delphi murders. We'll explore the investigation and how all of this led to suspicions of cult activity in this small town. This is a difficult deep dive to hear, so please take care of yourself. But if you're ready for more, sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post a couple videos like this every single week, and I like to go live on the weekends. So if you're into this sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Today we are here with a highly requested video, which I really appreciate because this is something that I was like, everybody's talked about it, everybody's unpacked it. Do I really need to add anything else to the discourse? But some of you have been asking for it, so I thought I would just provide this for you. So without further ado, let's jump right in. It was a day like any other, until it wasn't. At 2:07 p.m., Libby posted a photo to social media of Abby gingerly walking across the abandoned Monon High Bridge, the tall iron span visible against the winter sky. It was a snapshot of a carefree young woman on a breezy day, and unbeknownst to them at the time, it was the last proof of life from the girls. When 3:15 p.m. came and went with no sign of Libby or Abby at the predetermined pickup spot, Libby's father grew very concerned. Calls to the girls' phones went completely unanswered, and by 5:30 p.m. that day, the families reported the girls missing, and a search began in earnest along the trails and woods where they'd been seen. That's only a 4-hour span for them to go somewhere, be lost, and an investigation or search ultimately starting. It just feels so scary that your life can change or you could lose someone you love in such a short period of time. Now, initially, law enforcement and volunteers hoped the teenagers were simply lost or injured along the trail. I mean, this area is very remote, very wooded, and it's crisscrossed with deer paths, so it's kind of easy to get turned around. Searchers were yelling and screaming the girls' names into the darkness that February night. Their shouts were met only with silence and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Authorities didn't expect foul play at first. thinking perhaps the girls had wandered off the path or even fallen near the creek. But as midnight passed, the worry deepened. Flashlight beams pierced the cold night in vain. The close-knit Delphi community rallied immediately, with dozens of townspeople volunteering to scour the trails and creek banks alongside the police. Everyone was refusing to give up hope. But the next day, hope turned to horror. On February 14th, 2017, Valentine's Day, searchers expanded their efforts in the daylight. Only about a half-mile from this bridge, in a wooded area on the back end of a private property, a search party made a gruesome discovery. Just after noon, less than 24 hours since they left their home, the bodies of Libby German and Abby Williams were found near the edge of Deer Creek, about half a mile from where they'd been dropped off the day before. The location that they were found in was less than a mile from the bridge, and it was on land owned by a local man not far from the water's edge. Investigators quickly set up yellow crime scene tape amid the bare winter trees, and the joyful hopes of a community collapsed into grief and panic. 2 promising young lives had been brutally cut short. Authorities remained tight-lipped about the crime scene details. The manner in which the girls were killed was initially withheld from the public, an unusual decision that hinted at the disturbing nature of the crime scene and the need to protect investigative details. Quote, no details surrounding how the girls were found or their cause of death have ever been released, unquote. RTV6 actually reported that exact quote at the time. What police did say immediately, though, was chilling enough. This was a double homicide investigation. Carroll County's Sheriff Toby Leesenby acknowledged that until an arrest was made, the community should be cautious. Quote, I can't say there's not a threat to the community, unquote. This is what Sergeant Kim Riley of Indiana State Police told reporters. We've not caught the person yet. Is the person still in the community? We don't know. Fear, once unthinkable in Delphi, began to spread. I mean, Delphi is a very rural town of only about 3,000 residents where everyone knows everyone. Like when I think about that community versus the community in which I live, where there are literally millions of people, I'm like, I feel like I never see the same person twice in a day. That's a tiny little town. So the idea that a murderer was lurking among them was utterly devastating. Shock and sorrow rippled through the community as word of these deaths spread. Impromptu memorials sprang up near the trailhead, flowers and stuffed animals, and even handwritten messages were left by friends and strangers alike. That evening, many people in Delphi kept their porch lights on in tribute to Abby and Libby, their way of lighting the darkness that had descended on the town. The pain of the loss was obviously felt most deeply by the girls' families, who had to endure both personal tragedy and intense public interest. To truly feel the weight of this crime, one must know who Abby and Libby were. The bright, talented, loving girls who were stolen from their families. So let's get to know them a little bit better. Liberty Libby German, who was 14, was an 8th grader who was known for her big heart and even bigger dreams. Libby lived with her grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty, who lovingly raised her and her older sister, Kelsey. From a young age, Libby was outgoing, confident, and endlessly kind. She dreamed of becoming a science teacher one day, and even took special classes at nearby Purdue University to explore her interests in forensics and investigations. Quote, she was interested in solving crimes or finding clues, her family recalled. It was an eerie foreshadowing of the role she would unwittingly play in documenting her own killer. At home, Libby was the family's little baker and uplifter. Her grandma Becky remembers and notes that Libby could whip up a batch of cookies in half an hour to share with everyone. Libby delighted in doing small acts of kindness, leaving encouraging Post-it notes for classmates and teachers, or using spare change to help a friend in need. Uplifting, outgoing, and kind are the words her grandparents used to describe her. Libby played softball. Her favorite position was first base, and she loved to practice her swing with her grandpa in the backyard. She was also tech-savvy and creative and often made funny videos on Snapchat or experimented in photography. It was fitting that on her final day, Libby used her cell phone to capture vital clues, a final courageous act that police later hailed as evidence of her heroism. Libby made it a point to make people feel good, her grandmother said. And even after her death, those who knew her remembered the many ways she brightened their lives. Now, for Abigail, or Abby Williams, who was 13, she was Libby's best friend, and in many ways it seemed like they were kindred spirits. Abby was creative, athletic, and so curious about the world. She lived with her mother, Anna Williams, and was the sunshine of her family. Oh, I would love to be the sunshine of anyone's life, honestly. That's such a beautiful, image. Abigail is a name that means father's joy, her mother noted. And there weren't many people she wasn't the joy of. She smiled all the time. Abby's warm smile and freckled cheeks left an impression on everyone she met. She channeled her creativity into art, making handmade gifts for friends, painting nature scenes, and even knitting tiny, colorful hats for newborns at the local hospital as a volunteer project. She had more crafts than you'd know what to do with, her mother recalled, and said that Abby loved to experiment with every kind of artistic hobby. And she was an athlete. For 3 years, she played volleyball, and she had recently decided to try softball with Libby. The two friends were dead set on taking over the world by softball, her mother said. Abby had to convince her mom to let her join the team, a victory that sent her grandfather, or Grandpa Cliff, driving down from Michigan to buy her a new glove and bat, a really happy memory that the family now holds on to. Abby shared Libby's love of the outdoors and photography. She would often borrow her mom's camera at events, taking pictures from her own very unique perspective. She had an eye for the world around her, finding details most would miss, her mother said. So that Monday, Abby was both model and photographer alongside Libby. They were exploring the trails with their youthful enthusiasm. And I just remember being that age, kind of like middle school, early high school, and there was so much freedom. Even though they were only going to be gone, and I'm sure their parents thought it would be fine just for a couple hours, the immense amount of freedom you feel when you get to go do something, just you and your best friend when you're that age. I remember for whatever reason, me and my friends would love to go just hang out at the movie theater. We wouldn't go see a movie, or if we did, we would show up 2 hours early and just hang out, flirt with the other middle school boys. It was a place where we would just hang out and meet people. And it felt like we were so cool just because we were doing it by ourselves. And so it just breaks my heart that these two girls were probably having a wonderful day until the switch was just flipped on them. Abby's final photo, unknowingly taken by Libby, captured her walking on that bridge, enjoying nature and adventure with her best friend. It was a scene of innocent joy that nothing, not even their killer, could erase from memory. The Delphi community mourned these two girls deeply. Hundreds attended the candlelight vigils in the ensuing days, lighting orange and blue candles because these were the girls' favorite colors, and released balloons in their honor. At Delphi Community Middle School, where Abby and Libby had shared classes and band practice, both actually played alto saxophone in the school band, which there was I think one sax player in our school band in middle school. So the fact that they both were and I just think saxophone is such a cool but rare instrument. I actually really wanted to play the saxophone, but I was kind of coerced into choosing the flute, which I liked, but I always thought the sax was so cool. People loved these girls. They knew so many people. They were ingrained in the Delphi community and in their school. Grief counselors had to be brought in while their classmates wept together. In April 2017, the school superintendent said that there was still grieving going on in the school. The loss of Abby and Libby was not just a family tragedy. It was a wound to the entire town. In the immediate aftermath, Delphi was a town on edge. Sheriff Liesenby described fear, concern, and frustration was running through the tight-knit community as days turned into weeks with no arrests. Residents who used to leave their doors unlocked at night began bolting them. Parents who once allowed their children to roam freely now kept them within sight. This is unlike anything this county has ever experienced, the sheriff remarked, explaining that the fear was palpable within the town. The fear that whoever did this was still among them, watching. Yet alongside fear was resolve. Almost immediately, efforts sprang up to honor the girls and support their families. Fundraisers from bake sales to car washes collected money to build a memorial park in Abby and Libby's names. The girls' love of softball inspired plans for new softball fields dedicated to their memory. The superintendent even said that it warms your heart that people are coming together to build something that'll be in remembrance of those girls. This project, envisioned in 2017, eventually became the Abigail Williams and Liberty German Memorial Park, which opened a few years later featuring softball diamonds where local children can play and remember the two friends. The support for their families, too, was constant. Libby's grandparents, Becky and Mike Patty, and Abby's mother, Anna Williams, expressed immense gratitude for the community's kindness. Still, their true focus was on justice. The community needed some closure. In those very early weeks, both hope and despair coexisted. Hope that an arrest would come soon, despair at each passing day without one. Law enforcement officials tried to reassure Delphi's residents that they were doing everything possible. They said they had 14 investigators working on this case every single day, noting that there was also help from state police, local police, and even the FBI. Everyone was collaborating and working together. Plus, news was spreading across the nation. Tips were pouring in. There were over 15,000 tips in just the first 2 months. And a reward fund quickly climbed up above $200,000. And the tip line was constantly buzzing with potential leads. If the killer was out there listening, authorities wanted him to know, we are not going to give up. Now, behind the scenes, investigators did have one crucial set of clues that were left by Libby herself. In a move that family and police later hailed as remarkably brave and prescient, Libby had the presence of mind to record video and audio on her smartphone when the girls sensed danger. The evidence from Libby's phone would captivate the nation. It was a grainy video clip of a man walking on the bridge with a snippet of a voice saying, "Guys, down the hill." On February 15th, 2017, just a day after the bodies were found, Indiana State Police released to the public 2 grainy images of an unidentified man taken from Libby's phone. The photos showed a Caucasian man in blue jeans and a navy blue jacket, and also a flat cap or hoodie walking along the bridge with his hands in his pockets. In one image, his head is down, obscuring his face. Now, these images were screenshots from a brief video that Libby had managed to record in the moments right before the attack. Along with the photos, police also released a short audio clip recovered from the phone. And this is where you hear this very low and authoritative man saying, "Down the hill." Which is so strange, but just the casualness in which he says it, in my opinion, upon hearing the recording, it felt to me like they knew him in some way. Like, maybe not very well, but it didn't sound like super, super forceful or loud, if that makes sense. So it wouldn't be until later in 2019 that an extended version of the audio would reveal the word guys at the start of the phrase, which to me adds a level of casualness to it. Guys, down the hill, confirming that the suspect was actually addressing the girls. So investigators actually believe that Libby hit record as the stranger approached them on the bridge and captured what may have been the perpetrator's commands to his victims. And Libby was rightfully hailed as a hero for this act. I mean, it's so hard to just open up your camera app on your phone, let alone do that if you're in a moment where you're feeling really, really scared. Indiana State Police even credited her for having the foresight to record evidence that could one day identify her killer. They even called her a hero. And with that, the public was urged to study the man's image and his voice. Watch the mannerisms as he walks, ISP Superintendent Doug Carter implored as a press briefing. Do you recognize the mannerisms as someone you know? The video shows the man's odd gait as he steps on the uneven, weathered railroad ties of the bridge. Carter noted the bridge's treacherous condition. It sways back and forth, not something you can just jump on and walk across if you've never done it before, unquote. And this suggested that the killer was actually very familiar with the area. The voice was played on a loop on newscasts and online. Guys, down the hill. It was only 3 seconds of audio, but those words burrowed into the public's consciousness. Who was this man? Why was he ordering the girls off the bridge and down the wooded hillside? In that simple command, one can sense the menace underlying it. Investigators desperately withheld whatever happened next on the recording, as well as other details. Even to this day, the full video and audio have never been released, but they had enough to galvanize the public. A blurry image and a haunting voice. Almost immediately, the unknown figure in the photo was nicknamed Bridge Guy. And I mean, we've come up with some better nicknames for perpetrators. That one seems a little bit weak to me, but that's neither here nor there. For months and then years, his hunched silhouette and heavy clothing were analyzed endlessly. Internet sleuths and professionals alike tried to enhance the photo, decipher the audio, and match the voice to suspects. Within days of the release, tips about the mysterious man flooded in. Police phone lines rang off the hooks as people called in with names of potential matches. A neighbor, a relative, an old friend, anyone who owned a blue jacket or resembled the grainy figure. The composite sketch of the suspect was developed from eyewitness accounts of people who were in the area that day. And in July 2017, officials released a sketch of a middle-aged man with a goatee and cap, hoping someone would recognize him. Now, at that time, the suspect was described as a white male between 5'6" and 5'10", 180 to 220 pounds with reddish-brown hair. The sketch, however, was just an approximation. Detectives even noted that they had drawn the man's hat differently in the sketch to better show off his facial features. And a lot of the people in the community was like, yeah, this looks like every other guy in our community. They're all these farmers with a similar build and wear the hats and wear their Levi's. This isn't that helpful. And in press conferences, police even started saying things like, look, if we started searching there right away, the perpetrator had to still be in the area. So they encouraged people who had been on those first initial searches within hours of the girls going missing to think about every single person they saw in that area. They were so determined to find this guy. I mean, law enforcement's messaging reflected that determination, but also careful restraint. They were navigating a very challenging balance, leveraging the massive public interest to try to generate leads while guarding the very sensitive details that were only known to the killer. The Carroll County prosecutor and Indiana State Police held press conferences at key moments, and they would often address the killer directly. Superintendent Doug Carter, in particular, became the public face of the investigation, speaking with a mix of empathy and barely contained anger.
Directly to the killer, who may be in this room. We believe you are hiding in plain sight. For more than 2 years, you never thought we would shift gears to a different investigative strategy, but we have. We likely have interviewed you or someone close to you. We know that this is about power to you, and you want to know what we know, and one day you will.
And his words, I just felt chills, but those words sent chills to everyone listening. Could it be that the killer was someone who had even participated in that search or stood in the crowd at the vigil? The notion that it might be a local person, one of their own, was almost too much for Delphi to bear. Despite thousands of tips and an all-hands effort by multiple agencies, weeks turned into months without an arrest. And the case, of course, captured national media, appearing on shows like Good Morning America and Dr. Phil. True crime enthusiasts on forums and social media dissected every known fact. And with the limited clues released, some online sleuths began formulating their own theories, occasionally spreading rumors or identifying innocent people as suspects, which law enforcement strongly discouraged. The police, too, had to weed through an enormous amount of information. By the 1-year anniversary of the murders in February 2018, investigators had received over 30,000 tips and interviewed countless individuals. They traveled across Indiana and even out of state, chasing leads on who this unidentified bridge guy was. The truth was, the Delphi murder investigation was extraordinarily complex. There was physical evidence from the crime scene that police kept under wraps, and a very small circle of investigators closely guarded those secrets, and this was all intentional. Officials said, quote, "We have to keep certain details confidential to preserve the integrity of this case." That meant that the public was often left in the dark, leading to impatience and oftentimes wild speculations. Carroll County's prosecutor, Nicholas McClelland, admitted in those early years that they were dealing with something perplexing. Despite the video and the audio, matching that grainy figure to a real person proved incredibly difficult. It was as if this killer had just vanished like a ghost. One early potential suspect was 77-year-old Delphi man Ron Logan, who owned the property where the girls were found. Now, Logan had a string of DUI arrests and a history of lying to police about his alibi on the day of the murder. In March 2017, FBI agents even searched his home, as revealed later in court documents. They suspected that he had participated in the murders. The search warrant affidavit, which was kept sealed for years but later leaked, stated grimly that the girls lost a lot of blood in the attacks and that their bodies appeared to have been moved and staged at the scene. The FBI agent wrote that the killer likely would have been covered in blood and may have taken a souvenir from his victims. Those revelations, which didn't become public until 2022, underscored how vicious the crime was. The girls' throats had been cut, and the scene was bloody. And indeed, it was later confirmed in court that the cause of death was by sharp instrument. Both girls had had their throats slashed. However, Ron Logan was eventually cleared as a suspect. He passed a polygraph, and his DNA didn't match unidentified traces from the scene, according to investigators. And Logan died in 2020, and he was never charged with anything related to Abby and Libby's murder. Now, the second year brought a dramatic change in direction. On April 22, 2019, Indiana State Police called a press conference that would both reinvigorate and confuse the public. Standing before an array of microphones, Superintendent Doug Carter addressed Delphi once more. But this time, he unveiled a new composite sketch that looked glaringly different from the first. The new sketch depicted a much younger man, clean-shaven with a narrower face and curly hair. He appeared to be in his 20s or 30. Carter explained that this sketch was actually drawn earlier in the investigation in 2017, but was now considered the primary representation of the suspect. The police now described the suspect as likely between 18 and 40, but he cautioned that he could also look even younger than his true age. Obviously, this was confusing and jarring. Many asked, had the investigation been off track for 2 years? Carter insisted that the case was not cold and that they were just simply refocusing. He urged people not to assume the suspect must be young, despite the sketch's appearance. The sketch is not a photograph, he said. It's a sketch, and the person may be a mix of features from both sketches. I'm sorry, what? Just brain explosion. Investigators also hinted that they had reason to believe that the killer was likely a local person, someone with intimate knowledge of the trail. That wasn't the first time he'd been on that high bridge, in my opinion, Carter said, noting how confidently the man moved on the rickety structure. Another reveal that day in 2019 was an extended snippet of the suspect's voice to the word guys added to down the hill. Remember, we talked about this briefly earlier. It made it abundantly clear that the voice belonged to one single male and not two people. The person talking is one person and is the person on the bridge with the girls, Carter said, hoping to squash any rumors that had been circulating online or anywhere else that there might be more than one perpetrator. Additionally, for the first time, a short video clip from Libby's phone was released, showing the suspect taking a few steps on the bridge in his blue jeans and jacket. Though only a second long, it gave a haunting glimpse of the man in motion. So this press conference marked a new chapter, and it generated fresh leads. Over 3,000 to be exact, that all came in within weeks of the new sketch's release. And it also fueled a few new rounds of intense public speculation. Some wondered if police actually had two different suspects in mind and then just decided to focus in on one, or if they thought, they mentioned multiple people weren't involved, so maybe multiple people actually are involved. So the truth just remained totally elusive. And now look, law enforcement had their reasons for their decisions, but much of it stayed behind the curtain. And one can only wonder why. Was it because they didn't want certain details to be released so that if they questioned someone, they would be able to catch them in a lie? Or were the details of the case so gruesome and disturbing they were trying to protect the public? Now, Superintendent Carter ended that emotional April 2019 briefing with a tantalizing line, quote, "We believe you're hiding in plain sight. Today may be the day. Sleep well." And then, in a dramatic pause, he added, "But today is not that day." And it was just a gut punch to the families and community who had hoped that this briefing was going to announce an arrest. Instead, they were left with the message that the investigation was just ongoing and the killer was still out there and could literally be anyone. So over the next few years, the case kind of seesawed between periods of public updates and long silences. Indiana State Police and the Carroll County Sheriff's Office quietly continued the painstaking work of case building. By 2020 and 2021, forensics from the scene were being revisited with ever-advancing technology, and detectives were re-interviewing witnesses from 2017 with fresh eyes. The Delphi Double Homicide Task Force was created and composed of local, state, and federal agents, and it still maintained its presence for a time. There were some promising leads that ultimately fizzled out. For instance, in September 2017, police in Colorado arrested a man named Daniel Nations for threatening hikers with a hatchet. Nations bore a physical resemblance to the first sketch and had traveled through Indiana. For a time, media swirled with speculation that he could be Bridge Guy. But Indiana authorities never found evidence linking nations to Delphi, and he was eventually ruled out. Then in December 2021, nearly 5 years after the murders, came another intriguing development. Indiana State Police announced that they were seeking information about a fake online profile named Anthony_Shots that had been active in 2016 and 17 on social media, including Snapchat and Instagram. The profile used photos of a handsome male model and purported to be a wealthy young man, but in reality, it was a catfish used to lure underage girls. How utterly disgusting. Investigators revealed that Libby German had communicated with Anthony Shots not long before her death. It was a stunning twist. Could the killer have stalked the girls online first? The public learned that police had actually known about this account early on. In fact, just days after the murders in February 2017, a 27-year-old man named Keegan Klein was investigated for the Anthony Shots profile and was arrested on unrelated child exploitation charges. Klein was from a town about 40 miles away and had been one of the last people to communicate with Libby via that fake account. Transcripts of a police interview later showed that Klein admitted to talking to Libby and even chillingly stated that he was supposed to meet her, but she never showed up. Klein denied any involvement in the murders, and for years, he wasn't publicly tied to Delphi. But when the Anthony Shots details surfaced in 2021, many thought the case was close to being solved. Keegan Klein was by then in jail awaiting trial on a slew of child porn charges. Some suspected his involvement, or even his father's involvement, in Abby and Libby's deaths. However, despite intense scrutiny, neither Klein nor anyone associated with the catfish account was ever charged in the Delphi case. Klein eventually pleaded guilty to the unrelated charges and in 2023 was sentenced to 40 years in prison for those crimes. For Delphi investigators, though, the Anthony Shots lead may have been a dead end, or perhaps just one piece of the larger puzzle. They've never fully explained the connection, and this leaves a lingering question mark. Was the catfish just this bizarre coincidence, or was it part of the killer's modus operandi? Throughout these years, the families of Abby and Libby did their best to carry on. Libby's sister, Kelsey German, pursued a career in criminal justice, inspired by her sister's case to help other victims' families. And wow, talk about using your pain to help others. That's just incredible. Abby's mother and Libby's grandparents became advocates for victims' rights and kept their daughter's story alive in the media. They would speak on anniversaries, reminding the public that the case was not solved and pleading for anyone with information to come forward. "We've never given up," Libby's grandfather said, and they hung on to Carter's words. "Today is not the day of resolution, but we will see that day." By early 2022, hope had begun to wane for many because an arrest seemed like it would never happen. Some outside observers even questioned if law enforcement had botched the case or missed their window of opportunity. But unbeknownst to the public, a crucial break was coming, one that would vindicate the patience of investigators and the faith of the families. On October 28, 2022, news broke that stunned the community of Delphi. A suspect had finally been arrested in connection with the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. The man in custody was Richard Matthew Allen, a 50-year-old resident of Delphi. The revelation was almost surreal. Allen was not a mysterious drifter or a known violent criminal. He was a married father, a lifelong Delphi local who worked at the CVS pharmacy right in the center of town. In fact, the CVS where Allen worked was only a few blocks from the Carroll County Courthouse where investigators had been convening for years. If Doug Carter's hiding in plain sight line had been prophetic, this certainly seemed to fulfill it. Many in Delphi knew Richard Allen was an unremarkable neighbor or the friendly pharmacy technician who handed them prescriptions. The idea that he could be the long-sought bridge guy sent shockwaves through the town. When authorities had a press conference on Halloween of 2022, they confirmed the basics. Richard Allen was charged with 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Libby and Abby. Carroll County prosecutor Nick McClelland announced that Allen had already appeared before a judge and entered a not guilty plea. Beyond that, however, officials revealed very little. Citing the ongoing investigation, the prosecutor successfully petitioned the court to seal the probable cause affidavit, or otherwise known as the document that details the evidence for the arrest. So the public was left largely in the dark about why Richard Allen had been arrested. For the families, it was a mix of triumph but also a somber reality. Libby's grandfather, Mike, told reporters that they have a big mountain ahead of them. And Libby's grandmother expressed an unexpected feeling, saying, "I don't feel like I thought I would. I've always said that I would be screaming on the rooftop. We're not. It's sad. Our lives for 5.5 years have been in search mode. We're not doing that anymore. So we're feeling our way, figuring out what our purpose is now." Her words underscored that while an arrest was a huge step, it wasn't full closure. There was a long judicial road ahead, and the emotional toll was still heavy. As the community grappled with the news, more pieces of the puzzle started to emerge through unofficial channels. Within a week, some details from the sealed probable cause affidavit leaked to the media. It became known that a single bullet found at the crime scene had played a key role in linking Richard Allen to the murders. According to later court testimony, this unspent .40 caliber round was discovered near the girls' bodies. Forensic analysis allegedly matched that bullet to a Sig Sauer pistol owned by Allen. Essentially, investigators believed the bullet had cycled through Allen's gun, perhaps during the commission of the crime, and had been dropped at the scene. When police searched Allen's home in October of 2022, they seized that pistol, and Allen could not explain why a bullet from his gun would be found in the woods next to the victims. This ballistic evidence was a linchpin, a piece of physical evidence directly tying a suspect to the scene. Exactly what they'd been missing for so long. Additionally, it came out that Richard Allen had been on police's radar back in 2017, but it was overlooked due to a paperwork error. A paperwork error. Astonishingly, Allen had come forward voluntarily the day after the murders on February 14th to report that he'd been on the bridge that afternoon. And in a seemingly innocuous move, Allen told conservation officer that he had seen 3 juvenile girls, not Abby and Libby, but other teens, and a couple on the trails, but he didn't see the 2 victims. He said he left the area around 3:30 p.m. 3:30 p.m. The tip was logged, but Allen's name was incorrectly entered as Allen Whiteman in the system, so he was marked as having been cleared. The report apparently got lost in a flood of tips. So it wasn't until 5 years later, in September 2022, that a Delphi homicide task force analyst was poring over these files and finally discovered the confusion. A civilian FBI support team member named Kathy Shank noticed the name error and brought it to investigators. How did I know it would be a woman? It's like we're just innately detail-oriented. So, could Allen Whiteman actually be Richard Allen? Shank also recalled that a witness, one of the other teen girls on the trail, had reported seeing a strange man in a blue jacket and jeans matching the bridge guy on the trail that day. So suddenly all the pieces started clicking together. Richard Allen's presence on the trail, his resemblance to that 2019 sketch, and some who knew him thought that he did look like the sketch. There was the bullet evidence, and several other factors formed this web, and it all pointed to Allen. Investigators moved quickly once the dots connected. conducting a covert investigation on Allen all the way through fall of 2022. And finally, it was October 26th of that year that they executed a search warrant at Allen's modest one-story home on Delphi's Whiteman Drive. A very eerie coincidence to that mistyped name. And they took him into custody. For Delphi, the arrest was a bombshell. The fact that Allen had lived among them all these years, shopping at the local grocery store, sitting in the same pub, working at the counter of a CVS, where it's like, he was literally handling your medications. He could have tampered with all of them. It was just hard to reconcile with this monstrous act that he was accused of. In one eerie detail, Becky Patty, Libby's grandma, recounted that not long after the murders, she had gone to CVS to print photos for the girl's funeral. Richard Allen was working that day and processed the photos, and he literally recognized her as Libby's grandma and refused to accept payment for the photos. Like, what? It was anecdotes like this that just sent shivers down the spines of townsfolk. As one resident put it, we all looked at the Bridge Guy sketch for years, and some of us joked that it kinda looked like Rick Allen, but we never really thought it was him. What? Now, many were replaying interactions they'd had with Allen, searching for any missing signs or clues. He had no criminal record to speak of besides some traffic tickets. He was married for many years. He lived a quiet life. But of course, like what always happens, in retrospect, some noticed that he had a habit of frequenting the trails. He was an outdoorsman of sorts, and he even had a photo on Facebook of himself at a local bar with the suspect sketch visible on the wall behind him. It's almost like he was glorifying himself with that. Who posts a picture of themselves with a police sketch of someone who looks like him, and it turns out he's the murderer? It's just like, is this real or is it a movie? I mean, the fact that this man was able to blend into this town for nearly 6 years, he didn't even try to leave or flee. I mean, it was just as remarkable as it was terrifying. So after the initial shock of Allen's arrest, the focus turned to the legal proceedings. The charging documents indicated that Allen faced 2 counts of murder under Indiana law, including the possibility of felony murder, which is murder in the course of another crime like kidnapping. In a later court filing, prosecutors clarified that they were charging Allen with killing Libby and Abby while also committing kidnapping, which can elevate the severity of charges. Allen was moved to a state facility for his own protection because given the notoriety of the case and the local jail's inability to secure him long term, because people at that local jail probably were going to try to beat him up or kill him. The probable cause affidavit remained sealed for a time, but at a hearing in November 2022, a judge finally released a redacted version to the public. The document confirmed several key pieces of evidence. Witnesses had seen a man on the trail that matched Allen's description. One even noted that that man was muddy and bloody and appeared around 3:30 p.m. near a parked car. Allen had admitted in a 2017 interview to being on the trail, as mentioned earlier. And most damning was the lab analysis on the .40 caliber unspent round found between the girls' bodies, and this was linked by ballistic experts to Allen's pistol, which he acknowledged owning and still possessed in 2022. So in essence, investigators believed Allen had the means to control the girls by using that gun and forcing them, quote, down the hill, and that the gun's presence was proven by the bullet left behind. Allen's arrest brought relief, but the case was far from simple. Allen vehemently maintained his innocence. His defense attorneys, a pair of experienced public defenders named Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rossi, began mounting a vigorous defense, signaling that they would fight the evidence and perhaps point to other suspects. Pre-trial hearings in 2023 delved into issues like moving the trial out of Carroll County due to the extensive publicity and whether to keep documents sealed. Special Judge Fran Gull was appointed to oversee the case, and she ultimately decided that an impartial jury could not be easily found in Carroll County. So to balance interests, The trial itself would remain in Delphi, but a jury would be selected from another county, Allen County, in fact, and be bussed in with jurors sequestered. A gag order was also imposed to limit what attorneys could say publicly, given the intense media attention. As the legal process moved forward, some proceedings went under temporary secrecy. In June 2023, a leak of sensitive evidence, grisly crime scene photos copied by the defense team, led to a lot of drama. Those pictures leaked online, resulting in Allen's attorneys briefly stepping away from the case under controversy. However, the Indiana Supreme Court intervened, and the defense lawyers were later reinstated with the case back on track. Through it all, Abby and Libby's families attended the hearings wearing purple and teal ribbons. Throughout it all, Abby and Libby's families attended the hearings. They held each other through emotional moments and were forced to listen to those grisly details about what happened to their children. Now, just when it seemed like the Delphi case could not get any more complex, a shocking new angle emerged in mid-2023 via the defense team. In an unexpected and very dramatic move, Richard Allen's attorneys filed a 136-page memorandum in September of 2023 advancing a theory that the girls' murders were not committed by Allen at all, but by a group of local men engaged in pagan cult rituals. The defense claimed that Odinism, a form of paganism linked to white supremacist groups, which just, it's like, sometimes I don't understand. Well, I don't understand white supremacy really at all, but you hear them mostly with like Christian identities, aka like the Christian Identity Church or whatever it's specifically called. But like pagan white supremacists just seems so strange because paganism is inherently about like connectedness and being one with Earth. It's just like racist paganism? What? That's a thing? So these guys, they're trying to fight that this cult was the key to the case and that the investigators had ignored or covered up the cult angle. So at the heart of this allegation were the disturbing details about the crime scene that had never been public. Allen's lawyers asserted that the girls' bodies had been staged in various positions with objects arranged around them to resemble pagan symbols. According to the defense filing, sticks and tree branches were deliberately placed to form runes or letters from ancient Norse alphabets often used in pagan rituals, and they put these on and around the bodies. One such rune allegedly formed the shape of the letter F, which is from an old runic script, and perhaps most shockingly, the defense claimed that Libby's blood was used to paint the F rune on a tree near the crime scene. Now, these gruesome assertions painted the crime as a ritualistic sacrifice rather than a random act of violence by a lone predator. Furthermore, Allen's attorneys pointed the fingers at specific individuals. They alleged that two groups of Odinist practitioners in Indiana were persons of interest. One purported Odinist living in nearby Logansport had a son who was reportedly dating one of the girls, presumably Libby, and this man had posted some creepy images on social media mimicking the crime scene poses, which remember, none of this was public at the time. Another man in Rushville, which is in southern Indiana, allegedly confessed to involvement in the murders according to the defense memo. The filing named multiple people with names redacted in the public versions, which, why are you redacting these names of people who are admitting to not just be murderers, but parts of cults that do ritualistic murders? It just doesn't make sense. Allen, they argued, had zero connection to any pagan or cult activity, and no DNA, hair, or other forensic evidence tied him to the crime scene. In contrast, they insinuated, there were plenty of red flags pointing to these other individuals, which police allegedly ignored. The memo included interviews and statements that suggested law enforcement was aware of the weird symbols early on. The defense cited an investigator's notes from 2017 indicated that they had consulted with a Purdue University professor about whether the stick formations were indicative of Odinism. At that time, the professor reportedly told police the symbols were not definitively Odinist in nature, and this led investigators to abandon the cult theory. But Allen's team managed to locate that very professor in 2023, Dr. Jeffrey Turco, who by then had a very different point of view. According to a recorded statement by Dr. Turco obtained by the defense, upon reviewing the photos of the stick arrangements, the professor stated it was a given that someone was trying to replicate Germanic runes and that the idea of a ritual human sacrifice scenario was entirely plausible. Turco even allegedly consulted a Harvard colleague who agreed that the symbols looked intentional. Allen's lawyers went further, claiming law enforcement knew about these cult connections and potential suspects from early on and intentionally suppressed this line of inquiry. In their filing, they wrote scathingly, quote, "Due to either incompetence or concerted intentionality, those in charge of the investigation refused to arrest or even properly investigate these obvious suspects. While the prosecution has been holding on to this exculpatory evidence, Richard Allen has been living in hell," unquote. They described how Allen, once jailed, was allegedly mistreated. Wow. Like, what do you think? I just don't think that it is in the police's best interest to ignore evidence like that. And it's so fascinating that the defense would just go with this defense argument. It just seems kind of out there. But we also know, if you've been watching this channel, that ritual human sacrifices in cults does happen. So it's just kind of, it's like my mind is blown. Okay, so get this. This is going to even twist your brain even more. So in Westville Correctional Facility, where Allen was held pre-trial, the defense claimed that Odinist correction officers threatened and intimidated him, even painting pagan symbols on his jail paperwork. Richard Allen has been monitored, intimidated, and mentally abused by correctional officers who are also members of the Odinite cult. So would that answer why police just swept it under the rug? Because apparently in Delphi, everyone is a secret Odinist? I feel like I'm not talking about a real case right now. It's just so much is intertwined. And it's one of those things where you're like, is the defense just like blowing up tiny bits of information out of proportion? Because it could also very well be that the bodies were staged, because that was a theory at one point as well, that the bodies weren't a part of a ritual, which if it was part of a ritual, it would imply that multiple people were involved. So that would present some anecdotal evidence, or I suppose speculation, that all these police officers are secretly involved in this cult and they're just trying to find a scapegoat. But if that were true, wouldn't they find the scapegoat like immediately? It's just like the mental gymnastics, right? So I'm so excited to read some of y'all's comments. And actually, the defense requested that he be moved to a different facility because of the abuse allegations on the guards of that facility. But Judge Gull had actually denied moving Allen despite his deteriorating condition in custody, which happened to include severe weight loss. The defense's dramatic assertions ended up making headlines. So to me, I'm like, this is a distraction tactic, you know? Like, yes, there's validity that there is a potential cult in this area or multiple sectors of this cult, but also it feels very much like exploitation of the media's interest in this story. So to some observers, it just read like a wild conspiracy theory. But to others, it raised the possibility that Delphi's mystery had even deeper layers. Importantly, The defense also challenged the state's evidence, specifically the ballistic match of that bullet. They argued that the science behind matching an unspent round to a specific gun, and pointed out that there were no photographs or video evidence of the bullet at the scene. So this raised some chain of custody concerns. Now, Sheriff Tony Liggett reportedly admitted in a deposition that he hadn't seen any photos of the bullet in the ground. The implication was that the bullet might have been placed or moved, and its link to Allen could be less definitive than prosecutors claimed, just like what is happening. Finally, Allen's lawyers questioned the fundamental premise. Could one relatively small man, Allen's about 5'4", I'm 5'3", so that's like a very short man, could he subdue and kill 2 teenage girls by himself in broad daylight without leaving behind more evidence? They mapped out a timeline that gave roughly 77 minutes for the crime and the escape and listed all the tasks the murderer supposedly did. Control 2 victims, force them down a steep hill and across the creek, commit 2 murders while 1 victim presumably witnessed the other being attacked, dress one of the girls, as the filing mentioned that Abby was found in her own clothes but was also wearing some of Libby's clothes, and then also stage the bodies in some kind of ritualistic fashion, and then also place sticks in specific patterns, as well as paint a symbol in blood on a tree, then collect and throw away some of the girls' clothing in the creek, and then hike all the way back through the woods up a hill to his car, all without leaving any DNA or being seen by anyone. When you put it like that, it does make you question things, right? The prosecution's response was blunt. Carroll County's prosecutor, Nick McClelland, flatly rejected the Odinist theory as unfounded. In a reply filing, he said the state does not believe the defense's allegations are supported by evidence that they had collected, calling the memo colorful, dramatic, and highly unprofessional. Essentially, the prosecution maintained that the defense's cult theory was a distraction, a desperate concoction to create reasonable doubt. Investigators had indeed considered and dismissed the cult angle early on, and they stood by that decision. They remained confident that the evidence against Richard Allen was strong and that he was the correct suspect. And it makes me wonder if Allen was partly like goading his representation. Like, well, there's a cult in town. Because let's say that he did do the murder and he did stage it to look like a cult, did it? And then what if he like brings it up to his lawyers and he's like, it could have been a cult. And they're like, oh my gosh, let's go for it. Let's roll with it. It was a cult. Man. But what's even more scary about this is what if there is a truth to it? It seems like there is a history of some kind of Odinist cult activity in or around that area. What if there is a dangerous group out there? That's my question at this point now. But back to this trial, Judge Gull decided that the defense would largely not be allowed to present third-party accusations unless they could meet a high bar of relevance and credibility. So in other words, unless Allen's team could definitively tie those other individuals to the crime with solid evidence, the sensational Odinist claims might never be fully argued in front of the jury. Now, after many delays, Richard Allen's trial finally commenced in October of 2024, more than 7.5 years after the murders. A jury of 12 plus alternates from Allen County was selected and brought to Delphi under heavy security. For weeks, the jurors, 7 women and 5 men, listened to testimony and viewed evidence in a courtroom just blocks from where the girls once roamed and where candles still burn in their memory. The prosecution methodically laid out the case against Allen, the eyewitness accounts placing him at the scene, the incriminating bullet, the video and audio, without explicitly saying Allen was the man in it, but they did imply it strongly, and even admissions that Allen himself had made. In one police interview, Allen had conceded that he was on the trail and that there were no other adults out there at that time. He was inadvertently placing himself there as the only adult male in the area where Abby and Libby were attacked, and at the exact same time. So that statement boomeranged back in court. Investigators also testified about that vital tip discovered by volunteer Kathy Shank, which resurrected Allen's name from the backlog and led to his arrest. Shank herself took the stand, earning heartfelt thanks from her sheriff for the crucial discovery that got them all there that day. The defense, for their part, did what they could to poke holes. They questioned the reliability of the bullet evidence and emphasized the lack of direct physical evidence like DNA or fingerprints or even a confession. The cult theory was largely kept outside the jury's view, but the defense still argued that police rushed to judgment on Allen and ignored the possibility of multiple perpetrators. Allen, who exercised his Fifth Amendment right, did not say a word. On November 11th, 2024, the jury delivered a verdict that many had waited years to hear. Richard Allen was found guilty on all counts. He was convicted of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of felony murder while in the course of kidnapping for the killings of Abigail and Liberty. Emotions ran high in the courtroom as the verdict was read. Some jurors were in tears. Members of the girl's family held their hands tightly. And for Richard Allen, well, he showed little reaction. But his wife and relatives in attendance wept openly. An agonizing moment, realizing their husband, father, brother was now condemned as a murderer. At Allen's sentencing on December 15th, 2024, Judge Fran Gull did not mince words. Citing the heinous nature of the crimes, she imposed the maximum sentence, 65 years for each murder, to run consecutively, a total of 130 years in prison. It was effectively a life sentence for that 52-year-old man, Allen. In Indiana, there is no parole for murder. Allen would be 180 years old before his sentence ran out. And as the judge pronounced the penalty, she acknowledged the profound loss suffered by the families and the community. Abby and Libby's loved ones delivered impact statements describing the beautiful lives that were cut short and the gaping hole they left behind. What they went through was unimaginable, unquote. One of Allen's own attorneys admitted of the girls' ordeals and offered a rare note of respect to the victims. With the gag order lifted after sentencing, law enforcement finally spoke freely. Quote, "There is zero doubt that justice has been served and today is the day," unquote. This is what Carroll County Sheriff Tony Liggett was finally able to say, echoing the famous line, "Today is not that day," from years before. But this day was the day. For Delphi, after nearly 8 years, this was the day. The day when the unknown became known, when the manhunt became a conviction, and when Abby and Libby's families could finally say that the girls got justice. At a press conference following the sentencing, a photograph of Libby and Abby grinning in winter coats was displayed on a screen behind Mike Patty as he spoke. "Justice has been served for the girls," he simply said, holding back tears. Investigators also took a moment to give credit to those whose quiet diligence cracked the case. They hailed tip analyst Kathy Shank for finding the needle in the haystack, the overlooked report of Allen's presence, calling her volunteer work indispensable. In truth, the Delphi case was solved by a combination of dodged detective work, community support, technological forensics, and perhaps a touch of fate. It's sobering to realize that Allen might have remained free if not for that re-examined tip, or if not for the chance forensic match of a forgotten bullet. As for the lurid claims of ritual sacrifice and Odinist cults, the trial verdict inherently dismissed them. Jurors clearly found the prosecution's straightforward narrative that Richard Allen, acting alone, murdered Abby and Libby, convincing beyond a reasonable doubt. The alternate suspects named by the defense remain just shadows. None have been charged to date, and police have generally rebuked those claims. Allen's defense has vowed to appeal the conviction, likely arguing that evidence was insufficient or that other suspects should have been considered. Those appeals will take time, and it remains to be seen whether any new information or missteps in the trial could alter the outcome. But for now, Richard Allen is imprisoned in the Indiana Department of Corrections, serving 130 years. The journey from tragedy to trial has been long and torturous for Delphi. The case of Abby and Libby, the Delphi daughters as they came to be called, forever changed the fabric of the community. Delphi will never forget February 13th, 2017, nor the harrowing days that followed. But in the wake of the verdict, there is a sense that the town can finally begin to heal. On the courthouse steps after the sentencing, the families released blue and purple balloons into the crisp winter air and watched them soar upward, a gentle symbol of love and remembrance rising above the weight of sorrow. At the newly built Abby and Libby Memorial Park on the edge of Delphi, children now play softball on fields dedicated in the girls' honor. Laughter and youthful shouts echo where once there was only grief and silence. A bronze plaque at the park entrance bears the girls' names and a motto, "Together Forever," reflecting the unbreakable bond they shared. Each summer, a softball tournament is held there with teams from around Indiana coming to celebrate the lives of Abby and Libby. The tournament raises scholarship funds for local students, ensuring that the girls' passion for sports and learning continues to make a positive impact. Libby's sister Kelsey has become an advocate for utilizing social media in solving cases, often speaking about how her tech-savvy little sister helped catch her own killer. The audio, "Down the Hill," once a haunting mystery, is now a key piece of evidence that helped secure a conviction. It's a testament to Libby's courage. Law enforcement nationwide have remarked on how this case underlines the importance of digital evidence and community involvement. The FBI even used the Delphi investigation as a case study in training sessions on managing large-scale tip lines and multi-agency cooperation. In Delphi, life is finding a new normal. Kids still roam the trails, though often with a bit more caution and parental awareness. The Monon High Bridge itself, once a symbol of tragedy, has been refurbished as part of the trail system. No longer a dilapidated trestle, but a memorial walkway with safety improvements. Many find walking it to be a solemn experience, imagining Abby and Libby's final walk and whispering a prayer for them at the middle of the span, where Libby took that iconic photo of Abby. This case will likely live on in true crime lore for generations. A story of two innocent girls, an anonymous killer caught on camera, and a town that refused to give up, and a convoluted path to justice. It's a story with many chapters: horror, uncertainty, drama, and the final reckoning. While nothing can bring Abby and Libby back, the legacy of their lives and the love they inspired will forever remain the heart of Delphi. Let me know what you think about this case down in the comments below. Thank you all so much for your support on my channel and for your interest in this case. It was such a rabbit hole to go down. I didn't want to share too many gruesome details of the crime scene just because that's not necessarily what this channel is about. But it is really interesting to hear about a case where a cult is kind of alleged to be kind of like a scapegoat when there is an actual human being who does have some evidence pointed at them. And I think that when we sensationalize cults in this way, it diminishes the very true experience that people have in actual legitimate cults that might actually do something like ritualistic sacrifice. But what we have to understand is that cults also might never kill anybody, but still be incredibly destructive. So this case was fascinating. My heart breaks for Abby and Libby's family, and it just makes you really want to hold your loved ones close, doesn't it? But these two girls are so inspiring to me. They're so creative. They were so loving. They were so energetic, so full of life. And I just really hope that healing is coming for their families and their friends. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Please stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I will see you in my next video very soon. Bye.